So speaking from my own experience, identity has been huge in understanding that our money stories are so much more than, what might be happening in this single moment. So money stories, I think, are a really important way for people to begin kind of understanding their relationship with the concept of money and finance and these larger systems. And, for so many of us, that ties to our ancestral histories.
Hello and welcome to The Money Mindset Show, the place where we help female entrepreneurs to transform their mind so that they can achieve financial success in the least amount of time. Here, we talk about subconscious mind, we talk about money mindset chips, money mindset blocks, a strategy so that you can bypass your own money mindset and increase your income, better your relationship with money, and grow your business. Okay, before we start this episode, hey ladies, especially my women of color, this one is for you. If you are in business and hoping a mindset shift is all you need for financial independence, let me stop you right there. Financial independence isn't a magic switch. It is a process. Every move you make in your business should build on this journey, so that you don't have to waste another year of your life without the result. Forget about getting lost in social media and getting lost in all of the algorithms. Your moves should be working towards a bigger financial picture. That's where we come in. Inside of the Brown Way to Money Academy, we break down how to master money, identity, taxes, retirement, and investments, and how to erase guilt and shame around earning more and keeping more. It is about stacking your revenue step by step until everything fits together beautifully. Picture yourself right now, confidently securing your financial future while embracing abundance and enjoying your family, your kids, your time, being finally free of money worry. It sounds like what you need? Then head over to themoneymindset.com/academy. That is themoneymindset.com/academy and join us. But don't wait, because enrollment closes very soon. Let's first start with who Jasmine is and why do you decided to go this route with money?
Yeah. Ooh, big question. Honestly, I feel like I'm still figuring out some parts of that, of how I got to this place. I think for so many of us, our journeys aren't linear, but they make a lot of sense in retrospect. So I think for me, in kind of looking at the origin story of who I am and how I got to this work, it's really grounded in how I grew up with my family. I grew up in New York on Long Island, which is a kind of a microcosm of the rest of the United States, in that it has, folks from every class, culture, background, and they have communities in which you're able to kind of really see income inequality and wealth inequality kind of on full display from one block to the next, right? And so I grew up in that context, really curious about that reality. I think also being so proximate to Wall Street, to Manhattan, right, to the Big Apple, and seeing all the ways in which finance was this engine for so much of everyday life, and not really understanding why it wasn't translating to kind of better realities for everyone, right? So I grew up with a very particular access to this world of finance because my dad is a financial planner, financial advisor. And when I was younger, he actually worked on Wall Street as a stockbroker. And so I had an in-house, parental figure, best friends, to ask all these questions about capitalism, and I'm trying to understand what the mechanisms were, and really someone to also kind of vent my frustrations, I think, as kind of a kid, and to have someone actually hear me in that and validate my curiosity. So always knew that was kind of an advantage I had. I always had someone to help me navigate kind of, my savings and investment and, everything from opening a bank account as a kid. I had someone who really understood, credit scores. And I kind of took that for granted until kind of I went away to college and started studying economics and just being around people of so many different backgrounds, and realizing I had this insider advantage that I wanted to really democratize.
Right.
And I'm saying all this with the kind of humbling that I am not a finance expert. I never have been. I currently work in the world of impact investing, but I still don't consider myself a finance person because I focus really on people and stories, less on the numbers, which for me is really joyful because I'm not a numbers person. I have no particular love for finance in and of itself. But I am in love with the ways in which folks, especially from underrepresented from historically disinvested communities, can reclaim wealth in ways that actually decenter capitalism, ways that really go beyond kind of the traditional system of winner take all of, shareholder supremacy. I'm really interested in the innovative ways for people to reclaim wealth, not for the sake of money, but for well-being and what that means collectively. So that's a little bit of kind of like my origin, which
I love it. I love it because there is so many things that I see my word reflected on your words. I also grew up with parents, both of my parents are accountants. So I also grew up with that insider view, but it was a different view because it was the strategic view of everything. But when I went off on myself, it's like, okay, but there are things that guys didn't tell me, like the way I feel about money, the way that things happen. And it's this all other world that you just get to live when you are on your own and you start experiencing your own things. But also to the point of impact and finances. It's so funny that you just mentioned that you are not a finance person because you focus on impact. And I just made this morning a LinkedIn post about my journey because to me, I went into finances because I wanted to help people. Like I truly see the world changing when you understand this mechanism of power, which is money. And that's why I went into finances. So I'm in love in finances because I get to understand the world through the different eyes and help people. And when you said that, I'm like, we're in the same path, different kind of traffic lights, right? It's like you're in the same path with different traffic lights. And that is what really connects us all into where we connect, right? From the trauma of money. That's why path cross. So what made you get to the point on, okay, I am going to take this into a message that I can share with the public? And how did learning about financial trauma support you on this journey?
Absolutely. Yeah, for folks who may not be familiar with the Trauma of Money method program, it's an online learning community that really helps people bring into focus our relationships with money, right? And the ways in which we can decrease shame around money conversations and around money trauma, and increase discernment so that we can better ourselves, better our communities, and again, not fall victim to an extractive system that was not designed for the majority of us, especially women, especially women of color. Exactly. And that we don't want to recreate harmful systems, right? We want to leverage the tools and pieces that work for us while also tending to our own well-being and collective well-being. And so I came across the program from a friend, Nafasi Farrell, who runs Narratives Unbound.
Yeah.
Yes. And so Nafasi does really incredible work around just how do we talk about money so that we can redistribute wealth, reclaim wealth, and live a more equitable lives with one another. And so she recommended Trauma of Money. And I, at the time, like this was a few years ago, I had just kind of started on this book project, right? And I'm working on this book about financial activism. So I knew that becoming a trauma-informed practitioner would help really deepen my work as a writer. And I was working in the field of impact investing with clients. And I have a lot of friends and family who sometimes I'll point them to my dad, like as a kind of resource, but I also want to be able to help friends navigate, for example, paying down student debt or negotiating salaries. Like I find a lot of joy in being able to navigate that again, not even as an expert, but just as a friend. And so I signed up for Trauma of Money really with this idea of like, okay, I'm going to build my skill set so that I can help other people. And very quickly, was humbled in that I realized I have my own money trauma. It's so funny.
Yeah.
It's so funny how that works, huh? Where it's I think within like the first week I was like, oh, there's some things I have never unpacked, right? Even though I'm talking about money all the time, I'm working with it, I'm around it. You know, I think that it really opened my eyes to the reality that under extractive capitalism, we all have some form of trauma, right? And not just big T trauma in the sense of like one traumatic event or, you know, instance that physically harmed us, but also kind of the emotional and spiritual harm that can come with, you know, long exposure to systems that make us question our worth and our value. And it's about identity and like sense of self, right? Like trauma also shows up in those ways. And trauma isn't the things that happen to us. It's what happens inside the body as a response. And so I have been holding a lot of that. And, you know, I'm still kind of navigating that, especially I think because I grew up, you know, with some of that context I just mentioned of seeing kind of massive wealth inequality and disparities. But I think also had a really unique experience where I got to live this, you know, this childhood of upward mobility. I think more than most people ever experience in their lives, right? We went from, you know, my parents moved from kind of a lower income, middle class, working class neighborhood to now, by the time I went to college, they moved to a much wealthier neighborhood, you know, only 30 minutes away, but kind of a completely different world.
Right.
And so I got to experience that while those around me, you know, were experiencing housing insecurity, experiencing food insecurity, and these things that are kind of kept under the surface. And so I realized that I had some of my own kind of complexes around that. And it makes sense why I think I spend so much of my, like, you know, earlier years as an activist kind of railing against, you know, like, capitalism as a whole, beginning to get more nuance and still kind of, you know, understanding and letting that fuel me. But now, instead of just fighting against systems, which I think in many ways was a trauma response of like kind of a protective sense of I want to, you know, tear down all these systems. I'm also really interested now because of my healing journey around my own trauma.
Hey, interrupting this episode to remind you that you can go right now to themoneymindset.hub.com/academy. That is themoneymindset.hub.com/academy and get into the Brown Way to Money Academy, the only program that is going to teach you how to design and walk your path to financial independence as a woman of color in business starting today. Go to themoneymindset.hub.com/academy before we close enrollment.
And scarcity, how to build the types of systems and local economies that we deserve. Right. If we're just fighting against things, it's really hard to feel hopeful and to sustain ourselves. And so trauma of money really helped me, I think, deepen my capacity to regulate my own nervous system so that I could be a better activist, a better community member, a better friend, teacher, and co-conspirator for folks who are building a more just economy.
I love how you put it, because I do agree 100% that, and that's the way I approach it as well with the Money Mindset Hub and the programs that we develop, is that the way that we can control what it is not on our field of controlling, which is the system that we have, is by unsubscribing from those narratives and creating the narratives that work for us. And that has brought a lot of peace of mind and a lot of clearing of that financial trauma. And in general, many traumas that they are there, right? I do this not only for financial situations, but also body acceptance and your color of skin, and being a Latina, speaking about money in a language that is not my primary language. Is that all of these narratives, if I fight against it, they're just going to keep like the same way. They are not moving from there because it's a whole system behind. So what I have found very powerful and what have brought a lot of the clearing for myself personally is to see it from far away, understand what happened, really see, I see what this happened, exactly the moments on history, how it was created, unsubscribe from it and create a narrative that works for me, that I can stand behind it and say, hey, this is my time to claim my wealth. And I love how you phrase it when you say to really give folks the ability to claim their wealth, not for the money, but for their well-being. Because that to me is the bottom of everything. When in my own journey, because I went to study finances hardcore, like everything finances. But when my health got compromised, that was the moment I understood just extremely not worth it to do it for the money. And it's extremely not worth it to just keep silent and continue. It's just like tomorrow I'm not here. Like the only ones that are really going to have the whole is my mom, my dad, and my family. But at the end of the day, the system is not going to even know about that. So why am I doing this for? And that was when everything shifted for me. And I feel so validated by when I hear people coming and saying, I think this is the route I was going. And because I found because I found your methods, or because I found something that talked about this, like I kind of shifted. That to me means a lot. And that's what I see with your book. That when I saw your book, I was like, this is something that people is going to take and say, I can do it other way. So I want to ask you, how do you came up to like with the idea of the book? You said that you had some years on the work, right? The idea of the book, and really to be able to be on the space of putting your story out there all the way to get the book deal and get published and all of the things that you are working through.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I've always loved books. I just want to start there. I think as also like kind of like the nerdy only child, like books were what kept me company, right? As a kid, they're how I learned the world, fiction, nonfiction. And so I've always been a writer, but actually I've spent more of my life and my career, my early career, ghostwriting and writing in other people's voices, but basically my background, I mentioned that I went to study economics. I very quickly dropped out of economics because I realized that, I wasn't able to kind of really focus on it because I was so interested in jumping to how do we talk about people and power. And I wasn't interested in the equations aspect of it. And so as a college student, I had this amazing privilege to kind of craft my own major and become a peace and conflict studies scholar, where I really got to study social change movements throughout history. And I've always been interested in activism and social change and the ways that people against the odds from the bottom up are able to make big changes in their societies. And so that's really what I studied. And money was an element of that, but not kind of the main focus. And there wasn't a lot of scholarship around it. And so I think particularly studying things like mass incarceration, apartheid, like all of these different really big oppressive systems, I was curious about the role that finance, like who is profiting from these things, right? And we know that's such a motivation. So that was kind of my focus. And so I had this understanding of both, social movement strategies, tactics, campaigns, like all of those pieces, as well as the, trying to really understand the role of finance. And my first experience into that world of bridging activism and finance was in the summer of 2018. So this was Trump family separation policy was kind of top of news. There was all of this news of migrants in particular being separated from their families and incarcerated into these immigrant detention centers. There was imagery of mothers being separated from their children, right? And America as a kind of whole started paying attention to the ways in which we are treating certain people and locking them up. And I think the question became, well, how is this actually happening, right? Like, how are people being so quickly put into these horrible detention centers? And for me, I began learning from other organizers and activists across the country about the ways that big banks were playing a role in financing these for-profit immigrant detention centers where more than 70% of migrants were being held, which means that there was a what we call a heads for beds equation, right? Where the profit, the profit motivation, the actual business model was structured on how can we lock up as many people as possible for as long as possible. And cut as many costs as possible.
That word just made everything worse. Like the business model, like you shouldn't have a business model with these things. And the fact that you find a business model that it's wrong in itself. It's like, it's so many things in here.
And that's the thing. Like, I feel like our world is constantly developing where we always have to be in constant, kind of questioning of the systems around us and not normalizing them. Because, for example, folks are familiar with ESG, right? How do we screen out things that are detrimental to environment, social governance? But at that time, private prisons weren't a part of ESG screens. So even people could be like impact investors and still be invested unknowingly or knowingly in these private prisons, immigrant detention centers. So kind of the work that we did on that, the campaign banner that we used was called Families Belong Together. And it was grassroots organizations. And I got to participate and really see the ways in which we empowered everyday people to begin holding their big banks where they trusted their savings, accountable and saying, we don't want our money going to fund things that are hurting our communities.
Right.
So, long story short, did a lot of organizing in that. We saw a lot of success to the tune of over $2 billion moving out of the private prison industry. And that was for me, I think, another example of great. Now I've learned how to fight against things at scale.
Yeah.
And how do we go to actually building things, right, that are supporting these communities, immigrant communities, but also all of our communities, knowing that migrants are such a part of our fabric as Americans, right? And so I entered into the world of impact investing really with, honestly, just quite a few lucky breaks. I kind of entered just with my foot in the door as doing kind of executive assistant work, and doing just some comms work for Candide Group, where I was one of the first employees, where I've been for the last six years. And in that time, I've really been able to understand the impact investing field. We work specifically as a registered investment advisor with, high net worth families, foundations who are specifically interested in investing directly into companies and funds led by women and people of color that are social enterprises or have social impact core to their mission. So I got to see what it's like to work kind of on that side of the work, and moving, tens of millions of dollars every year into these really amazing entrepreneurs and spaces. And I think somewhere around kind of 2020, like many of us, became very introspective and began starting to realize the ways in which this world that I'm operating in, this high net wealth world, is so far removed from, how I grew up and my family and friends and like my understanding of everyday people, working class, middle class people who I know are the ones, again, from my background in social change theory, who actually drive change, but they're not a part of these conversations about impact investing or philanthropy or these strategies. So the seed was kind of sown for me to try and do some bridging there. And then, devastatingly, in the summer of 2020, we saw George Floyd murdered by police officers. And that was a moment, I think, that really catalyzed for so many of us some deep organizing. I went back, actually, I was stuck pandemic-wise back on Long Island. I live in California now. Yeah. But I live in Oakland, which is amazing. I was stuck at home and did some organizing with my childhood best friend around, understanding police brutality. And again, like the ways that finance plays a role in our municipalities. So I'm also like now doing my job, doing organizing and just trying to be like a girl in her 20s, trying to figure out how to navigate capitalism, right? And so what I did on I think it was the Sunday after George Floyd's murder, and we were organizing some protests in our town. And I put out a blog post. I put out a Medium post called the Financial Activist Playbook for supporting the movement for Black lives. And it really was just my attempt to take some of my experiences, again, working in finance and this world, and applying it to everyday people and thinking about all the power and money that we leave on the table in everyday lives because it's normalized to not take control of our finances or the finances around us. So I offered some strategies around here's how you can, bank with Black-owned institutions so that your deposits are actually flowing through Black communities. Here's how you can spend your money with Black entrepreneurs and businesses so that you're strengthening their economies. Here's how you can think about your investments, understanding that our prison system specifically targets those who are descended from legacies of slavery and other marginalized backgrounds, right? So here's how you can make sure you're not funding prisons. So I gave kind of the menu of options, and it was designed for the everyday person who's not in finance and may not even consider themselves an activist in any capacity, just someone trying to live their best life.
Navigate.
But who felt powerless and trying to remind people that like we have way more power than we've been told, right? One of my favorite quotes by the late great Alice Walker is that the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. And so I saw my role as kind of a way just to remind people of their power, of the wealth that we are entitled to that has been stolen, right? And understand that we not only can leverage our own personal bank accounts or, whatever cash we have, but we can also do our work to leverage all of the money around us by virtue of our organizations, institutions, local budgets. Like everyday people under a democracy have the right to claim and to really influence some of those aspects. So that was, sorry, I'm making a little bit of a long story, but that was kind of the origin, the blog post. What was really interesting then was I started having people saying, oh, can you come do a workshop for, my organization? I think I got invited to speak at, do a workshop for Apple, and I'm doing the same workshop for Oakland Rotary Club. And like, there's bookstores and there's all these different folks who are like, can you help us figure out our financial activist plan? And me, as a little bit of an introvert and a writer, I was like, I know, I will put it all into a book and then give the book out to people so they can figure out their own plans, which, very humbling, learned that in order to put a book out in the world, you also need to be speaking and continuing to do workshops. And, I found that I love that stuff too. But so it was about 3.5 years of actually writing the book. And honestly, the most fulfilling part for me, in addition to the kind of deep research, geeking out, about the different strategies, was being able to interview so many people who are financial activists. In that they, whether they're widely recognized for it or not, that they have moved money again against the odds at scale for collective well-being. And so the book details, and I think my greatest honor has really been being trusted to steward some of these stories, especially from communities that have been doing it in many cases kind of underground, and not underground in like illegally, but underground in that they have found ways to navigate the contradictions of our system in ways that are not kind of approved or stamped with the mark of approval by the traditional financial system. Right. Yeah. And so, that was kind of how I got to the book, the piece about the book and putting it together. Now we're here.
I love it. I love it so much. I just want to, of course, we're going to link the book link so that you can order. I already pre-order. I cannot wait to read this thing.
Thank you.
But it is so incredible to me how everything aligns. Like everything just pushes you one step further and say, this is the part that we need. This is how it connects. And then the next step is like, hey, you guys, I have a book for this. Like you want to follow me? I have a book for this. But I want to close with something that you mentioned before. And I think is very important for me to ask is, what do you see or what is your opinion in the correlation between identity and that financial well-being and financial activism that you're doing?
So speaking from my own experience, identity has been huge in understanding that our money stories are so much more than, what might be happening in this single moment. So money stories, I think, are a really important way for people to begin kind of understanding their relationship with the concept of money and finance and these larger systems. And, for so many of us, that ties to our ancestral histories. It ties to the ways in which, trauma may live in our bodies around the fact that many of us have ancestors that were exploited for the sake of these economies, or were the ones doing the exploiting, right? Which is also another kind of soul crushing experience, whether or not we consciously are naming that all the time or not. And so I think really understanding our ancestral stories and understanding how they are intricately tied to the legacies of finance and exploitation of other human beings is kind of the first step. And also recognizing that our histories are full of so much wealth, and not just financial wealth, but also the ways that people survived the unsurvivable, the way that they navigated with very little to lean into abundance, to make these really beautiful legacies. It took hundreds of grandparents for each of us to get to where we are today. And each of those grandparents has stories about how, whether or not we still have those stories, but about how they navigated and how they managed resources, because that's all economy is, right?
Exactly.
It's the management of resources. And so starting with curiosity around our particular identities and putting ourselves in context of this larger financial system is not only just an important exercise, but I think also really grounding and potentially healing. when we then allow ourselves to think about the ways in which our identities in the current moment are being shaped or are just connected to the larger economy, to our larger financial system. So thinking about the ways in which we grew up, the presence or absence of money and money trauma in, someone could have the same income, same amount of net wealth and feel deep scarcity compared to someone else who may feel deep abundance, right? Like it is all
exactly.
It's not tied to a particular number. It's tied to our own experiences and conceptions of self. So our current identity, and then thinking about, who we want to be in the future. What kind of ancestors do we want to be? What do we want to be remembered about? Like that's also part of identity that I think we don't talk enough about, because I lean deeply on the wisdom, especially from Indigenous friends and from elders who really think about our identities, not just as this moment, but 7 generations, backwards and forward. And so I think identity needs to be a crucial part of how we talk about finance, how we talk about financial activism in particular, because we need to put ourselves in context of what legacies are we carrying and what are we building for future generations.
I love it. I love it. And you just remind me of something that my great grandpa, who is, by the way, you guys that listen to this podcast know that I mention it every now and then. He was my inspiration for many things. He used to tell me, are building the steps that my great grandchildren are going to walk and the steps that their great grandchildren are going to walk. And to me, that your great grandpa tells you that when you're 14, 15, it was like, what are you talking about? I'm not thinking about having kids or anything. Like what? But now that I have my daughter, the moment that I found out that I was pregnant, it just made sense. Like your mind just went to, what am I going to do for this girl to be able to raise her grandchildren in a particular way? And it really ties to identity. And I wouldn't have been able to think that way if my great grandpa didn't install that on my mind. And possibly his great grandpa did it. So I love what you said. Thank you, Jasmine, so much for this conversation. It has been so insightful. Please let everybody know where to continue this conversation and where they can find your book.
Absolutely. So the book is available for pre-order. It comes out September 10th, 2024, and it is available everywhere, which is pretty cool to see it actually coming to fruition in that way. And I highly recommend, if folks are able to order it through their local bookstore. I am a huge independent bookstore fan. I think that they really help the kind of cultural vibrancy of each of our respective communities. Please support your local bookstore. Amazon does not need your money. I don't need you to go through Amazon to buy it. And if you do, I am grateful for that as well. To each their own. There is no one way to navigate unjust systems, and therefore, get the book however feels right to you. Order it through your local library. Libraries are really important. And you can stay connected with me directly. One, by going to my website, which is my first and last name, JasmineRashid.com. When you sign up to the mailing list there, you will get I'm really proud of it, a discussion guide zine that I put together that has over 80 questions and prompts and activities for you to accompany on the book that can serve as a book club or just a kind of a personal journaling guide. Very proud because my cousin helped put it together, who's a stunning graphic designer. And so always finding ways to, through this process of putting out a book in the world, really work with my community and my family and friends. So go get the discussion guide when you sign up for the newsletter. The newsletter is all about reclaiming wealth and collective well-being, practical tips, kind of every week or so. And you can connect with me on social media as well. I am on LinkedIn at Jasmine Rashid. I really want to encourage people to use LinkedIn more as a kind of organizing space instead of just a professional kind of networking space. And on Instagram at JAZZ_NY.
I love it. Thank you so much. And we'll link everything below. Okay. But before I let you go, did you know that you have a space where your money mindset work is made extra simple so that you can increase your income, better your relationship with money, and grow your business in such a simple and easy way? Go to themoneymindset.hub.com and choose your path and start making those changes easily and effortlessly. That is themoneymindset.hub.com.